So I'm going to deal indeed with a tradition, a union tradition of civil rights unionism and its legacies, but I won't have much time to talk about the legacies. It's going to be mostly historical today. In 2011, 43 years after the 68 sanitation strike in Memphis, the surviving members were honored by Obama for, I quote, their distinctive contributions to the quality of life of America's working families. 1 month into the strike, they had been honored too by Martin Luther King Jr., who went to Memphis to support the strike and made a speech at Mason Temple. And King basically argued that their strike was a strike for the dignity of labor in general. All labor has dignity, he said. You are reminding not only Memphis, but also reminding the nation that it's a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive poverty wages, as they did. King urged his listeners, mostly the strikers, 2,000 strikers and 8,000 supporters, basically to understand that the civil rights struggle was moving into a new stage. Not only basically the fight for equal rights before the law, but a fight for genuine equality, by which he meant real equality. King had made a speech to the AFL-CIO earlier, 7 years earlier, when he emphasized trade unionists the need to build a majority coalition led by unions and people of color in order to implement not only equal rights before the law, but substantive economic and social equality and justice. And he basically argued that the history, that's what I'm getting to, the linked history of civil rights and labor struggles in the past 30 years showed, I quote, that minorities and the labor movement are together in the same struggle. So he was already referring to a long tradition of civil rights unionism in that speech without before historians really got into studying the thing. And basically, he argued that fully enfranchised African Americans in alliance with trade unions could organize workers, yes, but also throw reactionaries out of Congress and then push pressure governments to enact major social reforms that would be that would benefit everyone. So it's a form of common good unionism before the act. I'm going to now talk about unheralded people that basically built that tradition of civil rights unionism and carried it into the late 60s up until the Memphis sanitation strike, and hopefully I'll be able to say a few words about what happened next. Basically, in the literature now, King's championing of civil rights and labor rights are put as part of a larger fabric of radical and reform movements in American history. And we've rediscovered the radical side of his own economic thought. Also, second generation civil rights historians basically emphasize the fact that the struggles of the 60s were part of a longer civil rights movement. Sorry, I'll make sure I don't miss the opportunity to change the slides here. So I'm going to align myself with people talking about the longer civil rights struggle going back at least to the 30s. That went into the 40s. Back then in the 30s and 40s, the civil rights movement and the union movement were not separate movements as we've come to think of it, perhaps misleadingly. Civil rights unionism joined them to the hip, basically. There was basically a coming together of laborers, civil rights activists, progressive New Dealers, Black radicals, and white radicals. Some of them members of the Communist Party, but others anti-communist. This was a national movement with a very engaged Southern wing that built up in strength over time. And it was part of what we've called the Southern Front, or the Black Popular Front. Basically, this was a movement that emphasized the fact that strong organized labor plus the re-enfranchisement of Southern Blacks, Southern poor in general, was the key to reforming the South, and that a reformed South was the key to pushing the New Deal further towards social democracy, basically, back then. Communists had other ideas, but there was actually a good sense that progressive politics in the US had to reform the South. This alliance proved short-lived in the private sector, at least. When I'm going to emphasize that in the public sector, it endured, it proved more resilient than people actually acknowledge in much of the literature, and the tradition survived in the public sector from the 40s into the late 60s, as I hope I'll be able to show a bit. So I'm going to skip on a lot of more contextual stuff about basically the right stock of the New Deal era and the conservative counter-revolution. I won't have time to go through all of this. But basically the point in the paper is to show that segregation, Jim Crow, stood between basically the New Deal vision of social citizenship and social democracy, and the popular support for that, and basically its enactment into law, because Dixiecrats blocked pretty much every legislation after 37. They diluted much of the New Deal legislation in order to basically protect the separate Southern labor market with its mix of caste and race, and its low wages, and its disenfranchisement of the Blacks. So basically, the civil rights unionism that emerged meant to confront Dixie and basically attack segregation as a menace, not only for the Southern poor workers, but also for the New Deal and reform impulse of the New Deal era in itself. So civil rights unionism, which Biondi calls the Black Popular Front, rose in the 30s and 40s, developed as a powerful social movement, sparked by this alchemy, says Jacqueline Hall, an alchemy of labor rights, civil rights activists, progressive New Dealers, and Black and white radicals, which I cited before. And even under the harsh oppression of segregation, I'm quoting David Montgomery here, Southern workers organized into labor unions of all types, industrial or civil rights, or very politicized or less politicized. And they developed, quoting him again, networks of union activists that proved to be of decisive importance in creating, sustaining, and protecting the organizations of the civil rights movement that historians have made better known. So we know a lot about the Southern Christian leadership and other organizations, but they needed a union infrastructure to strive in the South during these years. So I'm not going to deal with the private sector bit too much here. It's been well documented in industries such as meatpacking, mining, tobacco, lumber. There were very strong civil rights unions in the South. What I'm going to focus on is the public sector component of the movement, basically. So alongside private sector civil rights unions, unions such as the United Public Workers of America, or later Local 1199 of the hospital workers, or later the AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, who organized in Memphis, basically were instantiations of this tradition of civil rights unionism. Not much is known about the United Public Workers of America because they were smashed in the 50s under McCarthyism. But as the CIO launched Operation Dixie, which is seen as a turning point in American labor history and political history as well, the Public Workers of America launched a nationwide campaign to organize municipal workers and state workers. So in 46, the first year of their affiliation, they launched a campaign, and basically Flaxer, the president, identified the South as the union's principal targets, and it openly tied its organizing efforts to a broader vision of racial egalitarianism. So I won't spend hours, but the paper spends about 30% of the paper is about this union as basically establishing a tradition that will be then taken over by AFSCME. Because as I said, after having had early success, basically the United Public Workers organized 38 locals in the South in 6 different states. They organized strongholds among Black sanitation workers, and it's in the cities where they were strong to begin with that later on AFSCME developed strong sanitation worker militancy and then got union recognition. So already in the late 40s, there were some success, but there was turmoil in the union because of its acceptance of communists. It was expelled from the CIO in 1950. It declined afterwards, and it disappeared a couple of years later. It was smashed, as I said, but remnants of the organization found their way into other unions. What I show in the paper is that in California, for instance, the United Public Workers locals were absorbed into the SEIU, and in much of the rest of the country, they were absorbed in the AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. So the legacy of the United Public Workers was sustained most effectively by the AFSCME, the union that organized in Memphis, in Atlanta, and many other southern cities. The AFSCME had leadership that came from New York, Jerry Worth, an anti-communist radical, but he launched very aggressive organizing drives in the South from the beginning of his leadership. So he hired civil rights activists like Lucy, who was the main organizer in Memphis, to organize mostly African-American hospital workers. He dispatched staff to assist campaigns to organize sanitation workers. And basically, he developed movement frames, we could say, that were with his staff, like William Lucy and others, movement frames and slogans that would serve as model for reform. Dignity and democracy, we see a little placard there, became a really important theme in union drives, and it made critical links between the civil rights movement and union organizing that were not rhetorical. Civil rights activists were pro-union activists as well, as Bell wrote in 96 and 85. Nelson Lichtenstein talks about a rights consciousness that was really brewing during these years. I'm going to skip over this campaign here. So here's Lucy and Al Belek, who was attorney and basically a leader. And basically, generally speaking, they needed to be very militant during these years because of the inconsistencies of public sector law. And they had to resort to illegal strikes in order to push their cause. Growing willingness of public sector workers to defy the law in order to secure just treatment what led to strikes such as the one in Memphis, Tennessee. This 3-4 books have been written about the Memphis strike and hundreds of articles. So I'm not gonna rehearse the whole matter here. But basically, it was fought as a civil rights strike. The daily routine of the strike was designed to maximize the involvement of the community. Black women were central to the whole movement, marching, picketing, collecting cash, distributing aid, organizing a boycott. And it worked very well and the combination of labor and civil rights drew national attention by King, who went to Memphis to assist workers, but other leaders such as Bayard Rustin. King was assassinated while he was helping them in Memphis. And that forced the local, with public attention, pressure from the Johnson administration, etc. There was a settlement that really helped in the long run ameliorate conditions in Memphis. What I'm trying to show in the paper, I'm getting to legacies, a couple of minutes, is that after Memphis, this type of fusion of civil rights organizing and aggressive union organizing among blue-collar public workers continued. So in the following years, the slogan, "I'm a man," showed up at least 5 times in different cities in the South, Charleston, Atlanta, etc. The hospital strikes and the organizing of medical college workers, non-professional, also built on this link, crucial link between the Black freedom struggle and unionism. So I cover as well in the paper the hospital strike that was organized by SEIU Local 1199. As for the legacies for the future, we see in campaigns such as the Poor People's Campaign, the new Poor People's Campaign launched by Reverend Barber, the Strike for 15 movement, or even the Moral Monday movement, that the slogans and type of collective action repertoire and framing of the civil rights unionism has been much more resilient than we used to think. And it contributed, that's something I won't get into today, but organizing municipal workers and state level workers more than postal workers as well, but more than federal workers, contributed to this huge leap in union density in the public sector, right when there was a rapid decline of private sector density in the US. So basically the 70s were a key moment for the rise of service sector unions such as AFSCME and SEIU Local 1199. Success in the public sector allowed these unions to remain major players at a moment when others were rapidly declining. And I'm trying to work out a way to finish this paper, but as I said, I'm making links with these contemporary campaigns, including Fight for 15, and any input is welcome.